The orchestra. An orchestra is a group of musicians who play together on various instruments. Sometimes it performs alone. At other times it plays along with a group of singers. Orchestras give concerts and play for ballets or operas. They also provide background music for movies and TV shows. When we speak of orchestras, we usually mean symphony orchestras. They have many instruments and play mostly classical music, which is performed in concerts. Some symphony orchestras have only professional musicians. The most famous are in the larger cities of the world. Among them are the Berlin Philharmonic, the Vienna Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, and the Boston and London Symphony. Orchestral music is written in the form of a score, which shows the notes that are played by each instrument. Every musician only sees the notes that he or she plays. The conductor stands in front of the orchestra and directs the musicians. An orchestra can have up to 20 kinds of different instruments. Large symphony orchestras can have 100 musicians. Smaller ones, like chamber orchestras, have between 5 and 40 players. They originally were small enough to play in a chamber or hall. Sections of an orchestra. A modern orchestra consists of 4 sections or families of instruments. The string section is the most important part of a symphony orchestra. It has more than half of the musicians and consists of violins, violas, cellos, and string basses. The violinists play high sounds and are divided into 2 groups. The first violins and the second violins usually play different parts. The leading first violinist is the concert master of the orchestra. He helps the other musicians tune their instruments and serves as the assistant. Cellos and string basses play low sounds. The woodwind section consists of flutes, bassoons, oboes, and clarinets. An orchestra can have between 2 and 4 of these instruments. Sometimes these musicians change instruments. For example, a flutist may switch to a piccolo. These 2 instruments have high, piercing tones, whereas the bassoon may have the lowest tones of the whole orchestra. The brass section has several trumpets, French horns, trombones, and 1 tuba. These instruments are especially important in the loud, exciting parts of the music. Trumpets and horns play the higher parts. Trombones and tubas dominate the lower parts. This section is located mostly at the center and back of the orchestra. The percussion section has all sorts of instruments, especially those that you can hit, rattle, or shake. The drums are the best known among these instruments. In a symphony orchestra, kettle drums or timpani make the music more exciting. Other percussion instruments include bells, cymbals, gongs, tambourines, or xylophones. Other instruments like the harp, piano, or saxophone may be added to the orchestra if they are needed. The conductor. A conductor directs the musicians with a stick, called the baton. But he does important things before the performance. He chooses the music that is to be played at a concert and decides how it should be played, loud or soft, fast or slow. Then he calls the musicians to rehearsals, where he often lets sections or individual musicians play their parts over and over again until the sound is perfect. History of the orchestra. The word orchestra was first used by the ancient Greeks and meant the front part of a stage. During the Middle Ages, it also included the musicians on the stage. The first orchestras were organized by kings and queens of France and in Italian churches and places during the late 6th and early 7th centuries. Most of these orchestras used stringed instruments and played for ballets, operas, and at dance parties. By the early 1700s, some European composers like Johann Sebastian Bach or George Frederick Handel wrote music just for the orchestras. Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang A. Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven perfected the classical symphony in the late 1700s and early 1800s. In the 20th century, composers like Richard Strauss or Igor Stravinsky created musical works that needed large ensembles. Later, on electrical instruments were added and new sounds were created.